How are you, Dottie?
I'm fine. How about you? How is your Saturday going?
It's wonderful. It's a warm day finally here in Delhi, so I'm enjoying the warmth we have here.
All right. So you're in New Delhi and I'm in Bangalore. You're in the north and I'm in the south of India. So today
Yes.
we're going to talk about you. We're going to talk about your passion about food and we're going to talk about culture as well. So could you please introduce yourself the way you would like the people to get to know you?
Thank you. Firstly, I wanted to thank you for having me on the show, and it's my privilege to actually do this with you. I've listened to your past shows, and I think it's fascinating what you do. So thank you. I wanted to also say that my name is Zafar. I have grown up in India, but spent half my life abroad in the US. I enjoy food and I enjoy many aspects of food, as we'll get to discover today through this podcast. I'm also an avid traveler, and I think food and travel always go together beautifully.
So I'm going to ask you some fun questions before we move on into the conversation. If your life would be a theme song, what would it be and why?
So I had to think about this one quite hard. My theme song would be My Way by Dean Martin.
Mhm.
Firstly, I love the song and I love his voice, and I think it's such an elegant song, but it's also the way that I live my life is my way. I've learned to do things my way for quite some time now. And so the song actually talks to me more about life than anything else.
That's a personal and interesting answer. The second question, and it's going to be really related to what we're going to talk about. What is the strangest food combination you secretly enjoyed?
This is going to embarrass me. But when I grew up, and I must have been about 5 or 6, my grandma would make for me this breakfast. It was white toast with butter and strawberry jam and cheese and a fried egg on top.
Okay.
And what I would do is I love this stuff. And she and I would secretly sit down and eat it for breakfast every now and again. And it's a very strange combination, but I've grown up with it. And I still occasionally go into the kitchen and make it for myself and have it more to remember her and the love I have for her than anything else.
Okay, so basically this is like a family memory.
It's a very deep family memory of my grandma.
Okay.
And my grandma is also the one who taught me how to cook. So it goes back to those roots.
Okay. And what's a fun fact about you that most people don't know? And maybe you would like to reveal in this podcast?
Well, I think most people who know me know I love to travel. But
Mhm.
what they don't really know about me is I like to go to very remote places, still untouched. I've gone to places last year that still didn't have Wi-Fi and connectivity.
Okay.
I like to get away from the world. I like to get away and spend time on my own. I'm very happy in solitude.
Mhm.
And so, you know, it's not just travel and food that I do try and do as much of as I can, but it's finding remote parts of the world to go.
Okay. All right. And the last question, which is actually connected to what you said,
Mhm.
what's one thing you always pack when you travel, no matter where you're going?
So I'm a very light traveler. I've traveled with the same small carry-on suitcase for the last 15 years. And I've always believed if it doesn't fit in that, it's not required, right? So for me, I've learned what is needed and what's wanted, right? We want a hell of a lot, but what's really needed. So I take what's needed with me. Yeah, I figure you can always, if you've forgotten something, you can always buy it locally. But actually, what I don't pack but take with me is my open mind and a willingness to go into a new adventure and try something different. I think that's more important. It's not a physical thing, but it's more of a mental thing where I go in with an open mind, willing to learn, willing to experience new things, and willing to talk to communities and people and understand the world better.
Okay, very good. So if we come back to the topic of food, which is really what we want to talk about in this podcast. So you were talking about your grandma and what she was doing for you. Would you say that you got interested in food from a very young age?
I was interested in eating food from a very young age, that's for sure. So
Okay.
my background is kind of unique. My parents come from mixed heritage. My mother comes from Mumbai, so I had exposure to a lot of a lot of Mumbai food, Khoja food particularly. My father comes from Hyderabad, so I was exposed to Hyderabadi food. We grew up in South India, so I grew up with dosas and idlis and upama and all the South Indian food that today have become very common. And And I also grew up on the tea plantation. So there was this very big influence of British food and British culture. As the Indians know it, roast beef and roast chicken and mac and cheese and pies and quiches, etc. They were part of my everyday life. I think my interest in food was from a very young age. And I didn't know it till much later, but my palate was exposed to flavors and tastes at a very young age very quickly and to quite a diverse set of flavors. So I think it all stems from there.
So this podcast is about cross-cultural
Hmm.
stories. The reason why I wanted to do the podcast with you is because both of us think that there is a connection between culture and food. So when we think about India, what would you think, like, how would you describe the connection between food and culture?
So India has a very, very old food culture. It's one of the oldest in the world. It's a very proud food culture, and I'm glad that it's being brought to the forefront now on a world stage, really. And then what you've asked me is really, really a massive topic that a lot of people are very qualified to talk about, more qualified than I am.
Hmm.
But I want to focus on just a couple of points that I think are
Hmm.
important when it comes to food. The first is local cuisines. As we know, every state in India, not just every state, but within a state, there are local communities and local people who have their own cuisine. So the cuisine in Karnataka is very different from the cuisine in Tamil Nadu, and they're right next to each other. The cuisine from the south is very different from Karnataka, Andhra, which has Mughal food and Rayalaseema food and Kasyak food. And it goes all the way up north to Lucknowi food and Dehraduni food and Uttarakhand food. And then you go to the east and you have the northeastern states, which are fascinating when it comes to food culture. First, the growth of the reemergence, I shouldn't say growth, but the reemergence of these local and ultra local cuisines. We've seen it happen in the world previously. Roman food is very different than Tuscan food and is very different from food from Calabria, for example. You see it in Mexico, where Yucatan food is very different than Mexico City food or Oaxacan food, for example. So in India, I'm glad that we're beginning to recognize these ultra local differences within the cuisine. We're following that model of bringing them up to the forefront. The second thing that I think is very fascinating that's happening in India is the high-end restaurants that are bridging the gap between the West and Indian cuisine. So some of the best restaurants in the country are Farm Law in Bangalore, run by who's headed up by Jonathan. There's Pratik Sadhu, there's Nar in Kasauli, there's Avaratna in Chennai, there's Indian Accent in Delhi. There are these absolutely fascinating restaurants that focus on local Indian flavors, local Indian techniques. And what they're doing is presenting it in a Michelin star or world's top 50 style plating. It's fascinating. It's beautiful. It's gorgeous. And I think that those are the two influences as a whole that are putting Indian food and Indian gastronomy to the forefront across the world.
When you talk about all of this, I totally agree with you. Like, I am not a cook, but I love to eat good food, and it doesn't have to be expensive to be good. And there's a lot of people who are not aware of this. Yes,
Yes,
if you pay a lot of money, you're gonna pay for the atmosphere. You're gonna pay because someone has a Michelin star. You're gonna pay because this cook is famous, or someone has made a lot of marketing and people like to go there. But just
yes.
last week, I was part of a book launch, which is written by someone who is originally from the lower caste of India. And he talks about the food which is made by this lower caste. And he wrote a book about it that I want to talk about on my podcast. And basically, after the book presentation, we actually tasted the food from this cast. And I
Mhm.
was impressed by how rich the flavors were and how maybe unaware these people from the cast are. Their food is very good. It has a lot of taste, is good quality food, and I really think you can have excellent food with very simple ingredients, and it
Yeah.
needs to be prepared properly. And I think
Yes.
that a lot of people who don't understand this. You can make delicious food with very simple everyday ingredients, and you don't need caviar, you don't need lobster, you don't
Yes.
need the most expensive crab or oyster to have
Yes.
delicious food. And I think the best cooks in the world cook with the simplest ingredients. They just know how to cook them. and also the flavors are important. And
Yes.
one country to another, the flavors of one ingredient can be completely different because it depends how you cook it. It depends how is the sauce or the gravy. It
Mhm.
depends how the spices are, like, are there any spices or are there not any spices? And recently I was talking about this with someone, and as you said, depending on where you go in India, the food is different, like France, like Italy, like
Yeah.
many food countries. But also when you go in India, what you eat in the south can be completely different from what you eat in the north.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think so. That's a very beautiful point that you bring up. I was just reading this book, Chutney, that was published by a girl from Bangalore. As a matter, you know how much I love Bangalore. I used to live there, and I used to love
Yeah,
Bangalore.
it's a wonderful
But yeah,
city for food, actually.
yes,
Some
I think
options.
it's the best city for food in India. But I'm getting used to Delhi now. So, but Bangalore, I can go and have benne dosa at CTR, and it blows my mind every time I go there how beautiful and how wonderful it is. The flavors, the crispiness of the dosa, the perfect, soft and crispy texture. And then, you go to the super expensive restaurants and you still have a great meal. The variety, the diversity is just, they have the Nati food, you have the Mangalorean cuisine, you have just so much going on just in one state. And this book, Chutney, I wanted to point out because she has 500 chutneys from around the country. And it
Hmm.
talks about the diversity. They mostly use, generally the same ingredients, but just the diversity of and creativity of each of the regions in taking these ingredients and turning them into a local dish that is so beautiful.
Hmm.
And then on the other hand, you have my very good friend Kerry, who wrote a book on Cook cuisine, which is a diet or Korwa cuisine, which is so deep dive into a single culture and single cuisine. And she
Hmm.
ties it into her culture and her heritage and the whole Korwa lifestyle, etc. And it's another beautiful book that just got published, as a matter of fact.
Hmm.
And so, as you said, it's the diversity that's one part that's very interesting, but you can also deep dive into it and take and learn so much from a culture and the people and their communities just by eating their food.
And also, at this book presentation, what was interesting is I learned that in India, when you're a butcher, even if you are a Muslim, a Hindu person, or a Catholic person, you need to be aware of the calendar of the religion, because in some religions, you don't eat meat certain days.
Yes.
So you need to know that some days, some Hindu people will not buy meat. But this is very cultural because in my country, this doesn't exist. And I learned this. And also, they wanted to do something with blood because in this caste, apparently they do dishes with blood. But the thing is, the butcher told them, I cannot sell you blood because I'm not allowed to. And if you have an accident or if you're arrested by the police and they see you with blood, they're going to ask you a lot of questions. And this is interesting because it looks like in some countries, some food are very sensitive to carry around or to cook. And in my hometown, we do some dishes with blood. We
Yeah.
have a dish which is called boudin, which is made with the blood of pork.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like it, but I really like it because it has this unique taste because they are preparing it, they're putting it with spices. But when you think about how this is made and where this is coming from, some people may think this is disgusting, but if this is prepared properly, this can be very good food.
Yeah.
Same as tripes, the tripes of an animal. For a long time, people would cook this, but nowadays it's very hard to find it. And
Yeah.
you really need to talk to your butcher and try to convince him that you want to buy it
Yeah.
because a lot of them don't sell it anymore.
Yeah, that's a very important point, and it's a very important cultural distinction. Distinction, no, but similarity. So you talked about fasting. A lot of the Hindu caste fast; they don't eat meat or go vegan on certain
Mhm.
days of the week, etc. I just traveled in Ethiopia, and we want to talk about a global perspective on this. The Ethiopians are vegetarian for 180 days a year.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
during right before Christmas, for 55 days, they turn vegan again. And since Christmas is so important to them from a
Hmm.
religious perspective. Restaurants go vegetarian for those 55 days.
Yes.
So it's not just they going vegetarian. The restaurants refuse to serve meat. The restaurants go to a completely vegetarian menu. So it's not just India. It's all around. It's around the world that we see these things occur, where where religion and customs and ritual are very tied to food. And I
Hmm.
think it's fascinating to understand the cultures and why this occurred. So that's
Yes.
the first part. But second, you brought up a very interesting topic that I particularly have been reading about for some time. So eating of offal, as you would call it, blood and organs, it's beginning to come back. But if you think about it historically, the English threw away the offal. It usually went to the poorer sections of the town, and the poor learned how to eat it. For them, tripe was a delicacy. It was their form of protein. In India, the Nawabs in Hyderabad, the Nawabs would eat the meat of the goat. And paya, which we say is the trotter of the goat, was given to the lower class and the poorer people. And today, everybody eats paya ka salan that was made from those trotters that the Nawabs did not want to eat.
And also, if we talk about blood, in some countries they're eating snakes,
Yeah,
and they also eat the blood of the snake, and you have to drink it just like this. So, but this is part of a tradition.
yeah. So I have seen blood drinking in Africa quite a bit. No, I've actually eaten the dish that you mentioned in France. There's also blood sausage in Germany that you can get. There's also
Yes.
blood pudding in Ireland that you can get. So, I mean, these all come from a very simple philosophy in life. When an animal was sacrificed, no part of it was ever wasted.
Hmm.
They believed that it was not right to kill an animal and waste any part of it. So
Hmm.
they would drain the blood and coagulate it for various reasons, whether it was used in a stew and or sausages or or blood
Hmm.
pudding or however it was used. The same thing with offal, kidney and liver and lung, and every part of the animal was actually eaten. They didn't believe in waste because for them, meat was a very, very precious commodity. And it didn't matter what type of form that meat was in. Today we've learned to look past that because we have various things that make these delicacies, and we don't think about the history of where this has come from.
Nowadays, there is more food wastage because people have more food than they need, and people don't realize how lucky they are to be able to eat every day. But also, some people cannot afford to eat meat every day.
Yes, yes, you can't.
So, like this is considered as a luxury item for some people.
Yes,
Now, you do have people who say that you don't need meat to survive, but that's another conversation. But for those people who eat meat, for a long time, meat was considered as a luxury product.
yes, exactly.
And the tribes and the blood was eaten by the poorer people.
Yes, yes. And I have a very good friend called Janet who actually wrote a book on food waste. It's a very fascinating book. Her, the concept of the book, she was a professor of literature at Harvard and a good friend of mine. And she wrote this book about food waste when you went to the best restaurants in Paris, and they ate in excess. And what happened to the food that was left on the plate or the food that didn't sell that night? So they would have a backdoor service that would sell food to the street, and the poor would come and buy it. And if you had only a pence, you'd only get a vegetable. If you had two
Mhm,
pence, you'd get a vegetable and a piece of meat, or
mhm.
you'd get a little bit of soup, or you'd get, so even then, when in the early 19th century, they didn't waste the food because it was considered a luxury commodity. So this was a fascinating book written on the history of food waste in Europe during that period, but it touches where you have actually gone to.
And when we were getting ready for this podcast, at some point you told me that you were an accidental cook. So, what kind of food do you cook? And what
I
made you become a cook? Like, I mean, you are. You don't do this for your job, but you enjoy doing it.
Yes, I am an accidental cook because I like to eat too much. So I had a career that was independent of the kitchen for quite some time. But during that time, I traveled a lot. I traveled around the world and I got to eat, I got to eat food from Michelin star restaurants all the way down to street side, restaurants. So I, go to all across Europe and try dishes in Singapore and et cetera, et cetera. So it was a fun job. I enjoyed it, but I go out and eat a lot because of the teams that I worked with. And so I'd come back home and I liked to cook. So I went to Singapore and I ate laksa. I went to Italy and I ate risotto. And my mother made cow suey. So I learned how to make these dishes. I wanted to learn how to make them. I wanted to learn to relive those flavors and those emotions when I ate them for the first time. So what I would do is I'd come back and I'd buy a cookbook that had a recipe and I'd start cooking it and I'd start learn to cook it. And I became quite an accidental cook because I enjoyed doing this and enjoyed hosting parties and enjoying hosting people at home, etc. And then as I traveled, I learned about more flavors. I cooked and I learned more about cooking techniques and I learned, etc., about more things. And it really became more fun and more pleasure for me. So when I stopped work, professional work, I started cooking quite a bit. And then I realized I couldn't eat as much as I was cooking. So I started selling my food on a
Mm.
commercial basis and a small little, like a small home canteen kind of thing. People would come and pick up meals for the day. It was very small. I just did it for the fun of it. But over the years, I've learned to cook. I have a large cookbook collection and I've learned to cook from them. But I've also learned more about cooking techniques, flavors, and food, and how to enjoy it and how to create a table and conversation around food through this.
So, do you think you would be ready to go as far as doing like a cooking show? Because there are people who like to go on TV and try to challenge themselves to see their level of cooking. Do you think you would be ready to do this, or you just do this for fun and you don't want to go further than that?
Well, I don't think I want to do a cooking show. I also blog and I write about restaurants and I write about
Okay.
food and I write about other travel experiences and I write about food and culture. I do that. But I don't think I have the personality to do a cooking show, to tell you the truth. I think and there are lots of more qualified chefs who understand food better than I do.
Tell us about your blog. Like, what's the name of the blog?
So I run a couple of blogs. The first is a blog called A Bowl of Sugar. And this is a blog where I post recipes from around the world. We have about 1,350 recipes to date. And they're recipes from about 60 odd countries. And the recipes I really like to cook and I've tried before and I've eaten and enjoyed. So it was a COVID project. I didn't know what to do. I was cooking a lot, so I started
Mm-hmm.
writing a blog. And then I enjoyed it so much that I started doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Folks can go on, they can look at recipes, they can download recipes, they can do what they want with it. And I've got I try and put some very creative recipes. I put all the recipes from my mom on there, the Hyderabadi recipes that go back generations in our family. So things like that. I also travel the country and go to people's kitchens and work with their cooks or work with them and learn recipes. So, I try and get recipes from around the world and around India from locals who cook them and get the history of those dishes put on my blog. It's not just about the dishes. It's also about ingredients, techniques, and history of the food that I actually spend a lot of time writing about. And the second is I write on Substack under the traveler, the recipe collector, and the chef. So I write about my travels, I write recipes, I post pictures from around the world. It's a little bit more broader there, but it's something I enjoyed.
Okay, so I will make sure that I put those links in the description of the episode so that people can, read what you are doing, because it looks like you are a passionate person about food. And I think we connected because I was looking for guests who wanted to talk about food and culture. And you are one of the people who contacted me. So it's very nice to actually talk about this. So if someone has never been to India, so let's imagine someone is listening to this podcast and has never been to India, what would you recommend them to do to discover the best of India? So it could
Boy,
be
that's
related to food, but it could be related to something else that you think is important for these people to see and to visit.
yeah. So I've lived in India. I've lived abroad for 30 plus years, and I've come back to India. And it's always a culture shock to come to India. I got to say, it is a culture shock. When I first came back, it took me a few months to readjust
So
to
even though you're
India.
Indian, you always come
Even
back with a
yes,
culture shock. So
yes,
what
I
are
did.
culture shocks when you come
Yeah,
back to
and it wasn't just I went and left for 35 years. I kept regularly coming back to India for holidays. Come for a holiday, it's a very different ballgame. But the first thing I'd say is the population, the number of people. You have to get used to the number of people. But second, an advice I'd give Indian, because I want to keep this on the food front more, is to understand more about the word curry.
hmm
Curry comes from a Tamil word. And so curry, everybody says, I had a chicken curry or I had a I had a vegetable curry. But curry is a very, very broad term and a very, very formal, very, very large family of foods. A curry is a very broad term. What's really important is for them to understand the cultural background of that specific curry. So, for example, if you go to the north and you have a korma, it's a very different curry than a sambar, which comes from South India, or is very different from a butter chicken that comes from the Delhi area. So, they're all curries, they're all different types of curries. So, to really understand what curry is and to understand more in detail about the depth of the style of curry, where it is from, which community it belongs to, and what makes it important in its own flavor profile.
So basically, you are saying if someone visits India, you would like to focus on the food. If they go to northern India, what do you think people should eat?
Everything.
No, northern India is very broad
Yeah, yeah. The Indian,
because
yeah.
India is so big. So for example, you are living and working in New Delhi. So what is there to eat in New Delhi?
There's a lot to eat in New Delhi. That's a very interesting question. If I think about that, it's a very different way to answer a question that you asked me before. If they come to India, what should they eat? I said everything, but that's literally the answer. I think everybody should come and try not what they've heard of, on media and Instagram and things like that, but to really go try the local cuisines that belong to the region. You hear of all the big restaurants and you hear all of that, but there are a lot of local small places
hmm
that have fabulous food and a lot of culture and history behind the food, like you described earlier. And I think what's important for somebody who comes to India is to go and try these local places. Go with someone who understands the food, the culture, and the dishes. So it's not just a dish, it becomes more of a storytelling session about the community and the people. And once you appreciate that aspect of the food becomes so much more important to them.
I so agree with you. And this reminds me a trip I did in Assam in November with some friends. And eventually we saw on Google Map that there was like a little place called the Kitchen of Assam. And it's basically someone who is opening their house and they are cooking whatever they have for you. So there's no menu. You show up and you might be by yourself. When we showed up, so we were two people. When we showed up, there were three other Indian people traveling and we just ate whatever the person had. And he doesn't know every day who is going to show up. And we just ate local food and we were very happy about this because for me, this was one of the best experience I had because we went into someone's place who opens his house. You give them money for the food they are cooking for you and there is no menu and you just eat whatever they have. And I
Yeah.
think it's the best experience.
Yeah. So I do a lot of this when I travel internationally as well as within India. There are a couple of companies that do what are known as culinary tours, which is now becoming a big aspect of travel across the
Mhm.
world. So I was in Ethiopia and we went into a Hamar village and they had They actually killed a sheep for me, and we went through the whole Hamar ritual of what they do with the sheep blood, as
Mm-hmm.
well as the sheep organs. And then we roasted the sheep. It was night, so they lit a bonfire. They roasted the sheep, and we all sat as a whole village and ate the sheep. It was a fascinating experience. It wasn't just about roasting and eating the sheep. It was understanding their culture, traditions, and how this ritual matters so much to them.
Mm-hmm.
I then travel in the Northeast with my good friend who runs Curtain Call Adventures. Her name is Julie. And she does these amazing curated trips in the Northeast, Meghalaya, Arunachal, Nagaland. And what's important is that she takes you to these homes of these cooks who cook the local food, whether it be Garo food or Khasi food, etc., from the tribes. And you have these meals that are filled with storytelling and culture and I think it's fascinating. I think it's beautiful. And then I've also done trips. I did a trip last year to Angola where I cooked with, the best chefs in the country, literally the three best chefs in the country. And it was fascinating to see these masters of cuisine come together and talk during each of their meals about cuisines, ingredients, and not just bring out fabulous food, but talk how they're reviving local traditions, local heritage grains, local foods and dishes and bringing them back to the public. So what you described as culinary tourism, which I think is a fascinating way to travel and see the world. It takes beyond eating a dish. It's about understanding the people in the community that
Now,
dish
to end
belongs.
up this conversation, I would like you to tell me what kind of trips you like to do when you travel.
So I'm an avid traveler. I've been traveling for quite a few years now, and I something I really enjoy. It's something I work for, and that's my downtime. When I travel, I have two types of trips I generally like to do. The first is a very curated trip. I found trips both within India and outside of India. The first is with a company called Curtain Call Adventures with a good friend, Julie,
Mm-hmm.
who does
Okay.
these wonderfully curated trips in Northeast India across all the seven sister states there. She
Okay.
does a beautiful trip, which is culture, textile, food, and the tribes and the lives and community of that region. I mean, I've done two trips to Meghalaya, Arunachal, Nagaland with her, and I hope to do more. Um, and then, internationally, I do trips with renowned chefs. Naomi Dagood does trips to Georgia, which was the first trip I did that of this sort. And she also does a trip to northern China, Chiang Mai. It's all
Mm-hmm.
about food and culture and tying the food and culture to people. The other companies that I really like, one of them is Roads and Kingdoms that does trips to Europe and around the
Okay.
world that are very, very highly curated, a very high-end trip that does a lot with food and culture. So for me, but I also do trips on my own. I like to read. I like to research. I like to see what there is to do and go down to the basics and, eat with the locals and get into villages and learn about communities and festivals and all of that. So these are the types of trips that I enjoy doing both within India but also outside India.
I totally agree with you because if we want to discover a country, we really need to meet the local people. And if we don't meet the local people and we just go to the touristy places, I don't think we have really been to a country. So I totally agree with you. So thank you very much, Zafar. It was very nice of you to take the time to do this podcast. And who knows, maybe we will do another episode about something else, but it was very nice of you to take the time because I know you're very busy and you travel a lot. So thank you very
Yeah.
much.
No,
And
thank you.
hopefully, we will have an opportunity to meet in Bangalore to go and eat nice food.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me on here. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk about a subject that I'm very passionate about. And I think we've had a great conversation. And definitely next time in Bangalore, we'll catch up. We'll go get a
We
good
need to.
meal, and we will.
We need.
And yes, and thank you for having me.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. In this episode, we saw that food is about much more than just a meal. It's a way to remember family and meet new people with their own traditions. And remember that when you travel, the real food experiences are outside of the touristy places. If this story inspired you, listen to the other episodes and make sure to follow this podcast for more cultural insights from around the world. You can find the podcast on your favorite podcast platforms and YouTube. If you would like to know more about what Zafar writes about on his blogs, click on the links given in the description. You can also find the links of the book he's talking about in the podcast. Until next time, stay curious.